Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will take place in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, but number two, obviously, being the Emily Dickinson playlist here on the channel, where there are a host of poetry discussions for Emily Dickinson, but also one of my videos in the Darkest series, known as The Darkest Emily Dickinson's Darkest Poem. Sorry. The poem in question today is a poem that I probably have not given enough attention on the channel. It is a poem that is quite often sort of talked about as one of Emily Dickinson's most readable poems, and I think that's probably a fair assessment. It's a poem that maybe on the surface of things does not seem quite so, maybe even seems a bit daft, if not a bit draft. But it's one that might seem to be kind of throwaway, kind of sing-songy, maybe even kind of, you don't really associate a whole lot of seasonal poetry with stuff that's actually meaty, right? But I think that's what we have here with this poem. There's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So, what are we talking about here with this poem? There's a certain slant of light. Okay, light is how we see things. Light is what gives us, if you shine light into a room at different angles, the room might seem illuminated, the room might seem kind of spooky, the room might seem dark. It just depends. Light is what makes you see things. This is happening on winter afternoons. What is winter? Winter, often known, translates to death, right? Symbolically, winter is the end of things. It's the end of the year. It's when everything dies. Winter symbolizes death. So there's a certain slant of light. There's a certain way we look at things when everything is dying that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. The way we see things during this last part of the year is heavy on us, the way that cathedral tunes are heavy on us. It is reminiscent of death. This poem is about death, and it's a real trick of Emily Dickinson to be able to sneak death into the end here and have it so sing-songy, and the poem be about death, but people don't really, I don't think, associate this poem with death. Certainly not as much as I Died for Beauty, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. All of these all of these poems explicitly about death. But here's the question, and I mean it. I mean this question. I'm not asking this to hear myself talk. I'm not asking this in some facetious manner. Is all literature about death? Think about it at the most basic level. If there's an argument to be made that anything is not about death in at least the loosest of interpretations, I'm willing to listen to it, because I've been sort of stuck in this place for maybe a couple months where it seems like you could reduce the meaning of any piece of literature to death, even if it's about enjoying your life as opposed to what? Being dead, or not enjoying your life, because that's the same thing as being dead. Heavenly hurt, it gives us this slant of light that makes us think of death, this ending of the day, right? Because that's what makes slants of light. Where is the sun? This ending of the day, the short days in the winter anyway, short days when the year is dead, that gives us heavenly hurt, that gives us this pervasive sense of heavenly hurt. Think about that phrase, heavenly hurt. Probably there has been something in your life that eventually it's a bad thing. You lose a loved one, you all of a sudden have health problems, something where all of a sudden the rest of your life will be lesser. And you haven't thought about it because you can't bear to think about it until one day, probably you're in the shower. Probably you're trying to fall asleep. And all of a sudden, it dawns on you, oh, my life will never be as good as it had been. Never be as good as it had been. That's heavenly hurt. We can find no scar. But in that moment, when you have heavenly hurt, you've lost a sibling. You've discovered you have this ailment. You can point to that thing. That's the scar. In this moment, with the certain slant of light, reminding us that we will die. In this moment, we cannot point to that thing which might have hurt us, but internal difference where the meanings are, because that light makes us think, maybe I've wasted my life. What if I haven't done what I was supposed to? I can't rewind it. Have I missed the chance to do what it was that I was supposed to do, the meaning of my life? But this certain slant of light, this memory of death, none may teach it any what? None may teach death any meaning. Because it is the seal of despair. That's the big mamba jamba. An imperial affliction sent us of the air. It's an affliction that is thrust upon us by a higher power. When it comes, when this slant of light that is so reminiscent of death, when that comes, shadows hold their breath. Where do shadows come from? Slants of light. Meaning this is the natural progression of things. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So we have here a poem that comes essentially full circle, starts with death. There's a certain slant of light. A certain slant of light that what? That reminds us of death. When it goes, the slant of light that reminds us of death, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. Why would a poem like this be so circular? Because there's no escaping death. And yes, this does feel, none may teach it any, 'tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. It's very sing-songy. It's very well written, and it sort of breaks the mold of Emily Dickinson poems that start very strong and get very esoteric very quickly. This one's kind of, you can kind of follow it all the way through if you just keep hearkening back to that opening stanza. But it's funny, isn't it? It's funny that there's a certain slant of light that makes us think of the ultimate darkness. There's a certain slant of light that makes us think of the time we will close our eyes for the final time. And that's what Emily Dickinson is willing to do, willing and able to do. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. This is, we think of death as constantly, if we are to embody death, it is he is constantly in motion. There's always someone dying somewhere. Because I could not stop for death. I was the one that was too busy working. Death went ahead and stopped for me. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb, when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room. We have seemingly contradictory, or at least non-adjacent ideas that Emily Dickinson is able to put together so flawlessly. And this poem, I think, is it because? This poem, I think, even though it has lived so long as one of her more reachable poems, I don't think we ever look at it with the slant of light necessary to really dig into it. That's all I have for this. There's a certain slant of light by Emily Dickinson. If you like or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share these videos with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos a week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.